The narrow street where Maya lived had always been quiet. It's the kind of place where people kept to themselves and where neighbors were polite but distant. The houses were all similar, small, old, and close together, but somehow the people living in them seemed worlds apart. Maya had moved to this neighborhood 5 years ago, after her husband passed away. She was in her late 30s, childless, and her grief had made her retreat into herself. She spent most of her days working from home as a freelance writer who rarely left the house except to buy groceries or to take a walk around the block. The isolation suited her at first because it felt like a cocoon where she could heal. But over time, it became a prison of her own making. She realized that she knew almost nothing about the people who lived around her. She had no friends in the neighborhood and no one to talk to when the days felt too long. One day, as Maya sat by her living room window, sipping her morning coffee, she noticed something she hadn't paid attention to before. A flickering light in the window of the house across the street. It was the house of Mr. Collins, an elderly man she had seen only a few times in passing. He was always alone, moving slowly with the aid of a cane. Maya realized she hadn't seen him for weeks, maybe even months. She watched the flickering light, wondering why it caught her attention now. She thought it was just a lamp which was probably left on by mistake, but something about it bothered her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, Maya decided to step out of her routine. She walked across the street to Mr. Collins' house, telling herself that she was just being neighborly and that she was simply checking in on an elderly man who might need help. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was curiosity mixed with a sense of unease. When she knocked on the door, there was no answer. She tried again and again, but the house remained silent. Maya's concern grew. She walked around to the side of the house, peering through the windows. The interior was dark except for the faint glow of the flickering lamp. She noticed that the mail was piling up by the door, and the lawn, usually well kept, was overgrown. She returned to her house and called the police, explaining the situation. They arrived within the hour, and after knocking several times, they forced the door open. Maya stood outside, her heart racing, as they entered the house. A few minutes later, one of the officers emerged, his face grim. "He's gone," the officer said. "It looks like he passed away some time ago." Maya felt a jolt of shock. She hadn't known Mr. Collins personally, but the idea that he had died alone, unnoticed, made her chest tighten with guilt. She had been living right across the street, and she hadn't even noticed. The police told her that they would contact the next of kin and take care of the arrangements. They thanked her for calling them, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed somehow. She returned to her house, but it no longer felt like the safe haven it once was. The walls seemed to close in on her, and she felt the weight of her own isolation pressing down. A few days later, as Maya was sorting through her mail, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note which said, "Dear neighbor, if you're reading this, it means I've left this world. I don't know who you are, but if you're the one who called the authorities, I want to thank you. It's comforting to know that someone noticed my absence, even if it was too late. I don't have any family left, no friends to speak of, but I do have a favor to ask. In my study, you'll find a wooden box on the desk. Inside is something I've been working on for many years, a memoir of sorts. It's not much, but it's all I have. I was a writer once, you see, though the world seems to have forgotten that. I'd like you to have it. Maybe you'll find something in it worth keeping. Thank you, and may your kindness be rewarded. Thomas Collins." Maya stared at the note, her mind racing. She felt a strange connection to this man she had barely known, drawn by the loneliness in his words. Without hesitation, she walked back to his house. The door was unlocked now, and she let herself in, feeling a pang of sadness as she stepped into the silent, empty space. The house was neat, almost too neat, as if Mr. Collins had been preparing for his departure. She found the study easily, a small room with a large desk and shelves filled with old books. On the desk was the wooden box he had mentioned. It was simple, unadorned, and inside were pages upon pages of handwritten notes, essays, and short stories, all carefully bound together. Maya took the box home, unsure of what she would find. She spent the next few days reading through Mr. Collins' work, and as she did, she began to piece together the story of his life. He had been a writer indeed, but more than that, he had been a man with a deep love for the written word. His stories were filled with emotion, with longing, with reflections on a life that had been both ordinary and extraordinary in its own quiet way. As she read, Maya felt a kinship with Mr. Collins, a bond forged through the shared experience of loneliness and the search for meaning in a world that often seemed indifferent. She realized that his memoir wasn't just a collection of stories. Rather, it was a testament to a life lived, a plea not to be forgotten. The more Maya read, the more she felt compelled to do something with Mr. Collins' work. It was too beautiful, too poignant, to remain hidden in a wooden box. She began to wonder if she could find a way to share it with the world, to give his words the audience they deserved. She started by reaching out to a few literary magazines, sharing extracts of his work along with a brief explanation of who he was. To her surprise, several editors responded with interest. They were moved by the story of an unknown writer whose work had been discovered posthumously, and they wanted to publish his essays and stories. But Maya didn't stop there. She decided to compile Mr. Collins' memoir into a book, one that could be published and shared with readers everywhere. She spent months editing the manuscript, carefully preserving his voice while ensuring that the narrative flowed smoothly. During this time, Maya found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. The isolation that she had once embraced now felt stifling. So she began to reach out to her neighbors, introducing herself, making small talk, and slowly building connections. She realized that she didn't want to end up like Mr. Collins, alone, with no one to notice her absence. As the book took shape, so did Maya's sense of purpose. She felt like she was honoring Mr. Collins' memory in the best way possible, by giving his words the life he had always wanted for them. The day of the book launch was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Maya had never done anything like this before, but she knew it was important. She organized a small event at a local bookstore, inviting the few people who had known Mr. Collins, as well as her new neighbors. As she stood in front of the modest crowd, holding the book she had titled Echoes of a Quiet Life, Maya felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just about Mr. Collins anymore. It was about all the forgotten people, the ones who lived quiet lives and who left behind the stories that deserved to be heard. She read a passage from the book where Mr. Collins reflected on the nature of memory and how people are remembered or forgotten after they're gone. The room was silent as she read, and when she finished, she looked up to see that many in the audience were wiping away tears. After the reading, several people approached her, thanking her for bringing Mr. Collins' work to light. Some shared their own stories of loneliness and isolation, and how they had been moved by the idea that even the most solitary lives could leave a lasting impact. Maya realized then that she had done more than just publish a book. She had created a space for people to connect, to share their own experiences, and to feel less alone in the world. In the months that followed, Echoes of a Quiet Life received critical acclaim. It wasn't a bestseller, but it touched the hearts of those who read it. Maya received letters from readers who had been inspired by Mr. Collins' words, who felt that his stories had given them hope and comfort in their own lives. The success of the book opened new doors for Maya. She was invited to speak at literary events, where she shared the story of how she had discovered Mr. Collins' work and the impact it had on her own life. She found herself becoming more engaged with the world around her. She continued to write, drawing inspiration from the connections she was now making with others. Her own work began to flourish, and she found a sense of fulfillment that had long eluded her. But more than anything, Maya was grateful for the unexpected friendship she had found with a man she had never really known. Mr. Collins' words had reached across the void of loneliness and touched her soul, reminding her that every life, no matter how quiet, had a story worth telling. Years later, as Maya looked out the window of her new home, a small, cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, she reflected on how much her life had changed since the day she found Mr. Collins' letter. She was no longer the lonely woman who kept to herself, afraid to connect with others. She had built a new life, that one that is filled with friendships, creativity, and a sense of purpose. She still kept a copy of Echoes of a Quiet Life on her bookshelf, alongside her own published works. It was a reminder of the power of stories and of the connections we make even when we least expect them. And sometimes when she sat down to write, she would feel a presence nearby, a quiet, comforting presence that she liked to think was Mr. Collins, watching over her, proud of the legacy they had created together.